the two dots, 4 lines from the bottom, Tanu Rabbanan. So we are up to the issue here about Rosh Hashanah, about the first of Tishrei being the Rosh Hashanah for planting, for Netiyah, which means, as opposed to what we've said and what we'll go back to, which is that the first of Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for other agricultural issues like Shemitah and Yovel, which basically means that the new year within the Shemitah cycle, or the beginning of the Yovel year, begins on Rosh Hashanah in terms of the calendar year and how you identify what calendar year it is. This has to do more with accounting of age. In a way, maybe think of it similar to the issue of the kings, where it's for a particular planting that you do. You planted a new tree. How many years old is the tree? So not like, is it the 3rd year of the cycle of the Shemitah, or the 7th year of the cycle, or the Yovel cycle, which is like for everybody, what year is it? But it's for the particular thing that I did, when do we sort of increment its age? So you plant a new tree, and you have to wait for it to be, after it's only for the first 3 years of its planting, it is Orla, and only then you don't eat the fruit right away anyway, then it's Rabbi. 4th year fruit, which you redeem and you eat, and you use the money in Yerushalayim, or you bring the fruit and you eat it in Yerushalayim. And in the 5th year, you can eat it straight without any restrictions. So you would have, I guess, naturally thought it means 3 years from its birthday, or like from day to day, from that day in the year to the same day in the next year. But the Mishnah teaches that no, that on Tishrei, that's when it enters into its 2nd year. So you could have planted it a month, we'll see, maybe even less, but let's say a month before Tishrei, and then you could have planted it on Rosh Chodesh Elul, and then comes Tishrei, and it's already its 2nd year. Okay, so it'll be done with its 3 years after 2 years and a month, not even after 3 years.
Can you sell the fruit from the 1st year?
What?
Can you sell them?
No, Orla is even forbidden in benefit. You can't do anything with it. Now, normally, most trees don't produce fruit in their first 3 years. But the bigger challenge is that when it's not a new planting, but when it's like a grafting. Right, so we'll talk about that. So let's take a look at the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanan, Rabbi taught, Echad hanoteya, and this is what we start with. Whether you plant, ve'echad hamavrich, or whether you do mavrich, which is basically you take a, where are my markers? Do I not have any markers? Okay, we don't have any markers. All right, so what mavrich is when you basically take a branch and you bend it underground and it comes out.
Oh, there's a good picture. Thanks.
Okay, there you go. All right, it's an illustration, I would call, not a picture, but okay. you take a plant and you sort of bend it underground, and then it starts, and then you help it come up straight here. You support it up, and then it sort of comes out as another tree. Okay. It creates another tree. Like, why you do that rather than cutting it and replanting? Maybe because it's still getting the nutrients from the old tree. It's like I'm sure they know what they're talking. They're talking about.
Yeah. It's all over Paya.
Right. Mavrich.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The echad hamarkiv, or whether you do markiv, that's grafting. Okay, so these are all ways in which it's considered a new planting. Erev Shvi'is Shloshim Yom Lifnei Rosh Hashanah. So if you did this 30 days before Shemitah begins, before Rosh Hashanah or Shemitah, so basically like Rosh Chodesh Elul or earlier, before Rosh Chodesh Elul, excuse me, then, right, or earlier, then also Shana. Then it counts as the year, meaning for Orla purposes, when it comes Rosh Hashanah, since it was planted 30 days before, it's now considered to be in its year 2 from the Orla counting. And you can allow it to continue to grow on Shvi'it. If it is on Rosh Chodesh Elul or later, because Elul has 29 days, then lo al salo shana, it does not count as a year. So come Rosh Hashanah, it is still year 1 of it being a tree. Thank you, not year 2. Asur l'kaiman b'shvi'it, and you cannot keep it in Shemitah. Now, what is this idea of 30 days? We will see in a minute. There is actually a difference between the 30 days, and the Gemara is going to sort of conflate them, or dare I say, graft them. Anyway, there's actually a slight difference. The idea before Rosh Hashanah is of Shemitah is that, well, for now, we'll modify it in a minute, but for now, let's assume it's this idea of Tosefet. Right, we learned before that you have to be Mosif on Shemitah. You have to start the prohibitions before. We're going to find out that if you planted a tree on Shemitah, let's say on Shemitah itself, you would have to pull it out of the ground. You couldn't let it stay. So if you plant a tree before Shemitah during the Tosefet period, you also would have to uproot it. So one thing this is teaching you, we're going to modify it in a little bit, but for now, let's assume this is what it's saying, is that the Tosefet period begins 30 days before. Okay, that's for Allah of Tosefet Shmiyah. What it's also telling you is, for the Arla period, 30 days, you need 30 days to have all, of the previous year, so when comes Rosh Hashanah, you can say now it's in year 2. Anything less than that is it barely got started, so you can't already consider it to be year 2. You might remember that by the king, even if the king was elected a day before Rosh Chodesh, Nisan, or presumably Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, would come Rosh Chodesh of Nisan or Tishrei, depending on Jewish or not Jewish, and then it would be year 2. Here we say you need 30 days so that when it hits Rosh Hashanah, it's counted as year 2. That presumably is not related to the Shemitah issue, which is a question of how much you need for Tosefet. I mean, probably there's some relationship, but it's not the exact same ruling. Okay, so let's take a look at what the Gemara does with this. By the way, I should say something about this Markiv, where Tosfos has a discussion that in other sources it says that when you do Markiv, when you do this bending and regrowing, it's not considered a new planting, and you do not apply Arla. And he says, if you look at the 4 lines before the lines get wide in Tosfos, he says, V'yesh lomar dahasam keshelo nifsaka me'aviha u'bi'ilan zakein v'hacha keshenifsaka me'aviha. So he says that if you actually never cut it from the original tree, and even though it's growing out of a new place in the ground, it really is still physically an extension of the first tree.
Like
then it's a branch. It's a branch growing in a very bizarre way, and then it is not a new planting.
Wow.
And so when we're talking about being a new planting, it's when you do all of this, and at some point you actually then cut it and sever the connection. Okay, so now let's take a look at the Gemara.
Rabbi Linzer, I'm sorry, I don't understand the language of Asur L'Kaiman D'Shvili.
So that's what I just said. If you plant something on Shemitah, it would have to be uprooted.
It's not about uprooting.
So with the Asur L'Kaiman is you cannot leave it the way it is. You have to uproot it.
Because within 30 days, it's as if you
planted it on Shemitah because of Tosefet. Now again, we'll modify that in a minute, but that's, yes, the assumption now. Okay, and on top of Yudam Aleph, and here's a very funny halacha, and I have to tell you that I just got a shayla about this literally like 2-3 weeks ago, because Arla applies not only in Eretz Yisrael but even in Chutz La'aretz. So Arla and Kilayim, although they're both agricultural, apply also in Chutz La'aretz. Interesting about the aspect of Neta Ravai. You might have Arla applying in Chutz La'aretz but not Neta Ravai. Anyways, these can actually be halacha l'maaseh. So let's take a look, especially now with people doing Jewish farming and so on. So you would think, okay, it hits Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, now we're in year 2. But you sort of pay back for it a little bit at the back end, because Upeirot Ntiya Zo Asurin, the fruit of this planting are forbidden ad Tu B'Shvat, until Tu B'Shvat, again, it's something like Beit Hillel. In Arla, in the Ravai. If it's for the 3rd year, then the 3rd year of Arla applies till Tu B'Shvat, and if it's Net Ravai, that applies to the 4th year. This is really a bad time not to have the markers. Let me go see, maybe our markers in another room.
Sunday.
I was thinking the same thing.
Normally I would have them in my backpack, but I'm not going to work.
Harsh judgments.
Just high expectations.
Tough love.
What was that? That's Sunday? What did I miss?
Oh, normally I would have them in my backpack, but I'm not going to work.
What was everybody saying about Sunday? All right, anyway. So here you have, if it's year 1, and I wish I should do it right to left. All right. Okay, anyway, we'll do it left to right. Okay, so year 1. Okay, and here's Rosh Hashanah. Okay. So whatever. You planted it here. Elul, whatever. You planted the tree here. Comes Rosh Hashanah. You're in year 2. Okay? There's a whole other year. Rosh Hashanah. Now you're in year 3. Okay? Here's Rosh Hashanah. So you would think now, right? This is year 2. Now you're in year 3. You would think you go here. Now you're in the clear, right? Mm-hmm. But no, because the halacha is that the Tu B'Shvat is Rosh Hashanah for trees. At this stage, before it's 3 years, it's called Nitiyah. Remember the lesson is that Rosh Hashanah, that Tisha is Rosh Hashanah L'Nitiyah. But once it's 3 years old, it's an Ilan. And an Ilan, the Rosh Hashanah for it is Tu B'Shvat. So very strange halacha here. At some level, it's already an Ilan, but it's not yet. It's Rosh Hashanah. It's like caught in between those two because it's not yet. If it's not yet Rosh Hashanah, why is it an Ilan? But anyway, somehow after 3 years, it's no longer an Itiyah, but because it's Ilan, it's not yet it's Rosh Hashanah until Tu B'Shvat. So here is Tu B'Shvat. And even though you don't have the next Rosh Hashanah until here, whatever, so at this stage now, is it considered to be year 4? Because you've hit this Tu B'Shvat in the middle. Okay, so it actually, you would have thought this was year 4, but no, because it becomes an Ilan, it's not year 4 until then. And therefore, it is not year 5 until, although here's the next Rosh Hashanah, right? It's not year 5 until it gets into, right, until it gets into here.
It's sort of
Only
mixing
this
and matching, though,
is
right?
year 5,
Whether
yes.
it's a mitzvah for 3 years, you could say you need another 3 years once it becomes an Ilan, but no.
Yeah, well, no, that you don't. Orla's only 3 years, okay? So therefore, so it says that so the 3rd year extends till Tu B'Shvat, extends more than a year. It's basically a year and a third or whatever. And the 4th year extends till the next, I'm sorry. So this becomes now the 3rd year, right? It's Asr. This is Asr till this should be tried, and only here is it totally Mutar. Okay. So by the way, I don't know if this is going to confuse you, but maybe you're already confused. But if you actually would not have said any of this, right? If you would have actually have said that the Rosh Hashanah for whether for an Atiyah or whether for a tree is Tu B'Shvat, I think you would have been better off, right? Because if this would have been, right, if we would have just gone by Tu B'Shvat, right? If we would have just gone by Tu
It'll be the
B'Shvat,
same.
so that if it was this scenario, it would be the same, right? This would be year 1, then year 2, then year 3, and now year 4. You'd be fine, right? It'd be the exact same halacha. It doesn't become mutter until this Tu B'Shvat. But you'd even be better off. Because what would be the case if you planted it right here? If you planted it between Rosh Hashanah and Tu B'Shvat, in this scenario, right, even when you pass this line, you're still in year 1, right? But if you had Tu B'Shvat with the Rosh Hashanah, you'd already be in year 2. So actually having it like this, is worse than having it just be Tu B'Shvat. So this is the halacha that you start counting the years when you hit Rosh Hashanah, but it doesn't. But at the back end, it needs to actually be a year and a third. It needs to get to Tu B'Shvat in order to enter into the next year. Okay. Yes.
Presumably, right, Ba'aretz, if you're planting already sometime like well into the rainy season, then it's not really a full year. If you're planting before Rosh Hashanah,
right,
then you're definitely getting essentially a full year, full rainy season.
Right.
So presumably probably
but the trick is that you're getting this full year, but you get to count this 1 month as a full year. That's the trick, right?
No. If you planted in Tevetz, right, then you're not getting a full rainy season.
Right.
So this way, it makes sure that you're going to get that full.
Right. So
rainy
you're saying you're right. You're saying you're right. You do have to spend more time here.
It's a full
and in a
rainy
way
season,
that
a full year.
Right. So you're saying is the whole trick that a month counts is really because it winds up being more than a month from Tu B'Shvat, and in a way it makes a certain sense. You're right. So you could have said you go by Tu B'Shvat, but it has to be 5 months before, but we're saying a month before. It's an interesting way of thinking of it, okay? So that's what it says, okay? V'asurna Tu B'Shvat im la'orla. The orla applies not till Rosh Hashanah, but the year 3 goes till the Tu B'Shvat, till another third of a year. And im l'Ravai, and then the Ravai goes to the next Tu B'Shvat, okay? Minoni Mili, where do we know this from? The Amar Rabbi Chibar Avram Yochanan Umataba Mishmeit Rabbi Yanai Amar Kra. So Rabbi Chibar Yochanan says in some sort of lean, meaning inclined to say that this is coming from the name of Rabbi Yanai. It's based on the verse Ubashana HaRevi'it Ubashana HaShamishit. It says Shalosh Shanim Yelachem Harelim Lo Yeyachel. 3 years it is off limits. Ubashana HaRevi'it. So it's reading Shalosh Shanim, right? Shalosh Shanim Yelachem Harelim. It's off limits for 3 years. Bashana Haravit. Okay, it doesn't say Bashana Haravit. It's off limits for 3 years and into the 4th year. Right? You see how it's reading it? The off limits includes the 4th year. So it's not just off limits for year 3. It's even off limits into the beginning of the 4th year. This period of till Tu B'Shvat remains Arelim. And similarly, Ubashana Risia Kol Piryo Kodesh Shilulim, right? So the fourth year it has the status of Neta Ravai. Ubashana HaChamishit. So this status of Neta Ravai applies not only in the fourth year, but and into the fifth year. So the Vav means the previous status of Orla applies into the fourth year, and the previous status of Neta Ravai applies into the fifth year. So here you're already in the fourth year, right? Because you passed Rosh Hashanah, but it's still Orla. And here you're already into the fifth year, but you passed, because you passed Rosh Hashanah, but you haven't in Tu B'Shvat, so it still is Neta Ravai, an extra Vav. Pamim Sheberevi'it V'adayin Asur Misham Orla. Sometimes it's in year 4, after Rosh Hashanah, before Tu B'Shvat, and it still has an Orla status. Upamim Shebechamishi V'adayin Asur Misham Ravai. Sometimes it's in the 5th year, it's after Rosh Hashanah, but it's not yet Tu B'Shvat, and it still is Ravai. Now again, so we learned from an earlier pasuk that Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for the 3 years, because we learned out in Gzei Roshava, Bashana, whatever. That told us Tishrei. This tells us at the back end, year 4 and 5, for them to be, they start later, and we don't know exactly when later, but since we have this other tradition, which we'll get to, that for trees it goes by Tu B'Shvat, therefore we say that's at the back end, the beginning Rosh Hashanah, at the back end it goes by Tu B'Shvat. Yeah,
I just figured it out.
What did you just figure out? Your
My question.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So the Gemara says like this. Lema de lo Rabbi Meir. Now let's say this idea of 30 days. Now we're going to focus on the 30 days at the front end. What's that idea of being 30 days beforehand before it gets... Yeah, but we're not going to start with Shvi'is. We'll get to Shvi'is in a minute. We're focusing on Orla now. That it only gets to count as a year if it started a month before. If it was starting within a month before Rosh Hashanah, then it's not enough to increment it and to count it as a year. What's that going on? Lema de lo Rabbi Meir. Let's say that's not like Rabbi Meir. Ti Rabbi Meir, ha'amar, Rabbi Meir says, Yom echad b'shana chashuv shana. Even one day would have counted as a year. We already, like I said, saw that by kings. So he would say that here too. Okay, now we're not going to quote an example by Orla, but something a little bit more halachic than the king idea. Something that we'll think is relevant, is parallel to Orla. The Tanya, we're talking about par, amur b'Torah. The Torah speaks about different types of animals for korbanot. It speaks about egel, right? Egel ben bakar l'chatat, right? It speaks about an egel. It speaks about a ben bakar. Actually, those are different. It just sometimes says egel. Egel v'cheves b'nei shana is actually a pasuk. It explicitly says an egel is a year old. Then sometimes it says ben bakar. Egel ben bakar. So the fact that it said ben bakar and connected it with the idea of bakar means an older animal. And the third is when it actually says par, whether it's par or par ben bakar. So those are the three cases, right? You've got egel by itself. You have egel ben bakar, which is the phrase that's going to be king, and then you have par, whether or not it comes with the ben bakar. Sometimes it says par ben bakar. So egel, we're going to say, is 1 year, is within its first year. Whenever it says ben bakar or egel ben bakar, it's 2 years. And whenever it says par, it's going to be a 3-year-old. Okay, so let's take a look. Par Amur B'Torah Stam Ben Esrim V'Arba Chodesh V'Yom Echad, into its 3rd year, 24 months, 20 and 1 day. That's what Rabbi Meir says. Entering into its 3rd year. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Ben Esrim V'Arba Chodesh V'Lamed Yom. No, it has to be 30 days into its 3rd year. 1 day is not enough to say that it's already a 3-year-old. Shahaya Rabbi Meir Omer, because Rabbi Meir used to say, Komokum Shenember Egel B'Torah Stam. Whenever it says Egel by itself without Ben Bakar, Ben Shana. If it says Ben Bakar, either Ben Bakar by itself or Egel Ben Bakar, Ben Shtayim, 2 years old. Par, if it says Par, Ben Shalosh, 3 years. So when is it considered a 3-year-old? 2 years and a day. Now, again, it's also an interesting question. Are we conceptually saying that it's a 3-year-old? Or are we saying that the definition is into its 3rd year? And these are always like questions, right? I mean, for example, Tosso says, when we talk about the age of being bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, or the age of being, 3 years old for girls in order to be considered like reach a certain, halachic state, whether it's considered an act of sex and other types of things, we say that it's full years, right? You have to be 13, actually, no. I mean, we actually say by bar mitzvah. Well, yeah, say that.
You're 13.
It's your 13th birthday in a day, which means you have 13 full years behind you, right? So here, but he quotes an interesting opinion that says the idea of a 3-year-old by a girl for certain halachot relating to sex and whatever, we say it's 3 years old and a day, but there actually is an opinion that says 2 years old and a day, okay? So it's an interesting question, which is, are we trying to say that the cow is 3 years old, but one day makes it like it's 3 years old? Are we trying to say the whole definition is into its third year? The Gemara presumably understands that the idea here is that it's saying it's 3 years old. Like Rabbi Meir says, par is ben shalosh shanim, not in its third year, a 3-year-old. It's defined as a 3-year-old. Once it begins its third year, one day in, that makes it like it's 3 years. So that says one day. So according to him, the Gemara assumes that if it was planted one day before Rosh Hashanah, it should be considered to be its second year for the Orla. Now again, there's a little bit of a difference, right? Because there you're counting from its birthday, 24 months and a day from its birthday. Here you're counting a particular calendar date, Rosh Hashanah increments it, right? But okay, in both of them at least, we're saying that the question is, how old is the tree? The tree's third year, the cow's third year, is it, how many years old is it? And if the cow's considered 3 years old when it's 2 years and a day, then the tree also, although it's a specific day, will be considered already into its second year once it was just one day preceding. Yes, of course, it's also there its back end and front end, which we'll get to in a minute. Yeah.
This relates to something we talked about before, but for the trees, for the cows, for the B'nai Mitzvot, is it Jewish years or solar years?
Yeah, no, it's always Jewish years. But the question also is it what the Gemara calls miyom liyom, from the birth date, which is what we do for bar mitzvahs and cows and so on, and we don't do from trees, okay? Right. So trees goes by a calendar date, and it's at the front end, where these other things are going from birth date and they're going at the back end. So the Gemara is going to ask the difference of front end and back end. Okay, so let's take a look. But it says, at least according to Rabbi Meir, logically maybe, planting one day before Rosh Hashanah should be enough. You wouldn't need 30 days. So the Gemara says like this: Afilu tema Rabbi Meir, even according to Rabbi Meir. Ki kama Rabbi Meir yomech b'shana chashiv shana b'sov shana. When does he say one day counts? At the end. Aval b'tchilas shana lo amar, not at the beginning. All right, and you can understand a certain logic of that, particularly if you want to say you're entering into your third year. So then you did 2 full years beforehand and 1 extra day, begun your third year. But to say one day at the beginning and then passing some arbitrary point like Rosh Chodesh Tishrei makes it considered your second year, maybe it's not the same. Maybe he only says it at the back end, not the front end. So Amar Rava, so Rava said, V'lav kal v'chomer, it's a kal v'chomer. If it counts at the back end, it should count at the front end. Why? Uman nida she'ein tchilas hayom olala b'sofa, sof hayom olala b'tchilata. In a nida, the end of the beginning of a day does not count at the end, and it counts at the beginning. What does this mean? It means by a nida, a woman bleeds, has her period on a certain day, okay? Here it is. Let's just do it like this. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Wednesday. Like that. Friday, Shabbos, Sunday. Okay. You'll number these days. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. 5. Now, this is not how we practice Nida, which is that after a woman stops bleeding, she needs to count 7 clean days, 7 days without bleeding. I'll get to that in a minute. This is the Torah's Nida. The Torah's Nida says that a woman bleeds, so there's from the onset, there's 7 days, which is Tme'ah, and at the end of 7 full days, she goes to the mikvah the following night. So if a woman bleeds on Sunday at, 1 p.m., here she bleeds. This is day 1. So this is the end. Shabbos is the end of the 7th day, and she goes to the mikvah Motzei Shabbos. Okay, that's the Torah. 7 days from the onset of bleeding. You start the onset of bleeding, you count 7 days. She goes to the Torah at the end of the 7th day. So the Gemara says, look at this. She bled here at 1 p.m., right? But this still counts as day 1 of her 7 days. And when she gets here, she can't go to the mikvah at the beginning of day 7. She says the beginning of the day doesn't count. She needs the full day. Okay? So therefore, in this case, the beginning of the day, let's read that again according to Rava. When Shabbos begins, it doesn't count like she's done with her 7 days. Nevertheless, Sof hayom olala b'tchilata. When she bleeds here on Sunday, and she only has a few hours left to Sunday, those few hours count as day 1. But here, the beginning of day 7 doesn't count as day 7. You need all of day 7. So you see here, it was easier to count the beginning as the day than it was the end. Okay, so even a partial thing counts at the beginning, although a partial thing does not count at the end.
How about at
Okay.
1 p.m. on Shabbos? No, she has to wait till the sun goes down.
Yeah, exactly. So if that's true, Eino din, did I skip a line? Shana, a year, Sheyom Echad Ola La B'Sofa. Well, you were saying, according to Rabbi Meir, the cows, until the cows come out, the cows, one day counts at the end. Eino din, it wouldn't stand to reason. Sheyom Echad Ola B'Tchilata, that when you're counting years, so now we're sort of switching from cows to trees, but if in the cow case you can count one day at the end, you should certainly by trees be allowed to count one day at the beginning. Okay? So basically it's easier to count the beginning of a process and say you began it and now you're into already the second day than it is at the end. So by the cows we allow one day at the end, we should allow it at the beginning. It gets very confusing because like, 1 minute, if you're making a kal v'chomer, then why by cows don't we count both the beginning and at the end, right? You know, like, so count the end at the beginning, but we don't count the beginning of the cows. Part of the confusion is because by cows, it's not about passing an arbitrary calendar date. By cows, the system is, how many years since your birthday. So the only place you can do the partial counting is at the end. It's been 2 full years since your birthday, and now you've begun your 3rd year. Whereas here, by the trees, we're counting about a calendar date. So by the trees, the only logic it really makes is when you hit the date is when you increment. So the only question here is a partial thing at the beginning. Do you understand the logic? Like the only opportunity here to count a partial is a partial before the calendar date. Whereas by a cow, the only opportunity to count a partial is a partial, after a certain number of years from the birthday, you've begun the next year. But basing on Nida says, if in some circumstances we see that it's easier when you're beginning a process to say, oh, okay, you began it here, already here you're at day 2. As opposed to at the end, we don't say you began day 7 and you're done. Okay, so here it's easier to begin a process. So here too, if by the cow case you can count the end as already the year, here the fact that you began and then you began in here, it's easier to say, well, now you're already into year 2. That's the kal
The
v'chomer.
kal v'chomer going from a nida to a tree or from a nida to a bar?
From a nida, using the example of nida to set up what's easier to say, and then use that model to say, and therefore if you can do something by a cow at the end, you should certainly be able to do it by a tree at the beginning. All right? Just go with it, all right? Obviously,
But okay.
I always thought that nidot trees and cows.
exactly. This is just perfect for a parody. By the way, not to confuse you anymore, but but Rashi makes a point that he says some people make a major mistake based on this Gemara, and they say that they confuse it with the way we keep Hilchos Nida. So the way we keep Hilchos Nida is that, let's keep on going this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, is that a woman, let's say, gets her period here, we need 7 clean days, so normally, at least the way Ashkenazim do it, let's say we wait, she bleeds for a few, let's forget the way exactly Ashkenazim do it nowadays. Let's say she bleeds for a few days, and then she counts her 7 clean days, right? Then it would be 1, 2, 3, where she wouldn't be bleeding, 5, 6, 7, and then she goes to the mikvah, okay? So Rashi says some people make a mistake and say, oh, it says by Nida you can count the beginning. So that means if on Wednesday she stops bleeding at 2 p.m. on Wednesday, if it says by Nida you count the beginning, right? That's what it says. You count the beginning by Nida. You can count already the remainder of Wednesday is day 1. Right? So he says some people misread that in the Gemara. Says that's completely wrong. That's what the Gemara says that the Samaritans used to do. Totally not true. We're not talking about the clean days. We're not talking about the rabbinic way of doing Nida. We're talking about the way it is biblically. Okay, so because actually the rabbinic way would be quite the opposite, and then there's a whole question. Well, if it is the opposite there, what does that mean? The beginning is easier than the end. Anyway, let's confuse you a little bit more. Let's get back to the Gemara.
What the Ashkenaz do there? Is it counted as a full day or not?
You need to be. It's only the day after the bleeding starts, which counts as a clean day. Okay.
After the bleeding ends.
After the bleeding ends, right. But that's because Tosfos basically says the reason there you can't count a partial day as the beginning is because you can't call it a blood-free day because part of the day was bleeding. So he says that's a very different type of a reality. Here, when we count 7 days from the onset of bleeding, you don't have to say that it was a blood-free day. It's actually the bleeding day. So partial bleeding on the day counts as well. So it becomes funny when trying to count it as a blood-free day, then you can't count a partial day because part of the day there was bleeding. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Fine. Anyway, what we're saying is that if Rabbi Meir says by the cows, 1 day at the end counts, then Rabbi Meir should say by the trees as well, you shouldn't need 30 days. Even one day before Rosh Hashanah, it should be considered to be the second year when Rosh Hashanah comes around. So the Gemara says, okay, the Elamai. So what do you want to say? Rabbi Eliezer, Elamai, Rabbi Eliezer? You want to say it's Rabbi Eliezer? Because Rabbi Eliezer by the cows said 30 days, right? So again, we're assuming from the cows you can apply it to the trees. So that's what you want to say. This is Rabbi Eliezer that needs 30 days. Says that's not true. According to Rabbi Eliezer, shloshim v'shloshim ba. You need 2 30s. You need 60 days. What is this? Nan, he says, you're forgetting something. All you're looking at is how much time before Rosh Hashanah. But by trees, there's another issue. It only starts to matter once it takes root. You can only start counting the time that it's been planted, not when it goes in the ground, but after it's actually struck roots, and then is it considered to be really planted, and that takes time. So let's take a look.
How do you know?
Ain knows because we're about to see. Ain notim, ve'ain mavrichin, ve'ain markivin, same things you can't do, plant and bend over and graft. Erev Shviyas, pachas milamid yom lifnei Rosh Hashanah. You can't do it within 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. V'im natav yivrich v'yarkiv, and if you did any of these things within 30 days, ya'akor, you have to uproot it. That's, okay, they take out the variable leverage. That's 30 days. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol kavash she'ena koletes begimel yamin shuv ena koletes. No, 3 days. It's not 30 days. It's only once he says grafting, but presumably the Gemara assumes this applies to everything. That it only takes 3 days to take root, and therefore, if you planted it more than 3 days before, you're in the clear. You don't need 30 days before. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon Omrim, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon say, Shnei Shabbatot. No, 2 weeks it takes to take root. So if you planted it more than 2 weeks before, you're in the clear. Within 2 weeks, you're not in the clear. Now, this basically is saying that by Shemitah, I'm going to read this like Tosfos because Rashi's way will get a little confusing. The Tosfos says we're now rejecting the assumption that we had before, which was that the idea of 30 days before Shemitah is significant because you can't plant it during the Tosefet period. Okay, the reason of what you can't do before Shemitah is not you can't plant during the Tosefet period. You can't plant something before Shemitah that will take root on Shemitah. Okay, and therefore, how long do you need for something to take root? So here is the debate. The first opinion says you need 30 days. So if you planted it within 30 days of Shemitah, then it will have taken root on Shemitah, and then you have to uproot it. The other one says, no, it only takes 3 days. So as long as you planted it 4 days before Shemitah, it took root before Shemitah, you're safe. Now it's 2 weeks. So all of these, forget Tosefet. All of these it's just about how long it takes to take root, and you can't plant it before Shemitah in a way that it will take root on Shemitah, and if you did, it gets uprooted. Okay, but there we see a concept that it takes a certain amount of time to take root. And we're going to assume that the same way that's true in terms of the problem of having something take root on Shemitah, for this thing to be considered to get to year 2 by a new planting, it wouldn't start counting its time until it actually took root. So now here's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says like this: Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabbi Baravua. So Rav Nachman says the name of Rabbi Baravua. L'divya Omer Lamed. According to the one that says it takes 30 days to take root. So when it comes to Orla halachas, Sarich Lamed v'shloshim. Then if you want it to be year 2 for Orla, you needed to have 30 and 30. You needed 30 days for it to take root, and then the next 30 days for it to count as the first year. With Omer Shlosha, the one that says it takes 3 days to take root, Sarich, well, we'll get to that, but no, because the assumption is it doesn't count as a tree yet until it's planted, until it's taken root. It's like Rashi says, it's like it's in your home, it's like it's still wrapped up in the wrapping. With Omer Beis Shabbatot, according to the one that says 2 weeks to take root, so if you want it to count as a year for Orla, Tzarich Shtei Shabbatot B'Shloshim. First it needs to take root, then you need pay the 30 days, the 30 days.
But 30 days is the Tosefet.
Not Tosefet. We're not talking about Shemitah now. We're talking about Orla. It's the 30 days for 30 days of a year counts as a year. Okay? L'divya Omer, L'divya Omer Beis Shabbatot, Tzar Shtei Shabbatot B'Shloshim Yom. So again, by Shemitah we're throwing out the idea of Tosefet. By Shemitah, it's the idea is about taking root on Shemitah. But now that we see it takes time to take root, so if by Arla you need for it first to take root, and then you need the requisite 30 days. So you got a problem anyway. How come the Bright that before said Arla said 30 days? 30 days shouldn't be enough. Based on how long it takes to take root, you either need 33 days or 44 days or 60 days. So the Gemara says like, wait a minute. So the Gemara says like this. The Inami Reb Yehuda Svirle Gimel. So wait a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. So V'inami Reb Yehuda Svir like Gimel Shloshim Boy. So even if we held like Reb Yehuda, who says 3 days, the smallest amount of time you would need for Orla is 33 days. So how does our Mishnah say 30 days? So the Gemara has Ela Olam Rabbi Meir. You know what? You're right. The Gemara says I'm going to reverse it on you. We thought Rabbi Meir that by the cows said 1 day was a problem because we said you needed 30 days for Orla. Now Rabbi Meir is going to help us because the Breita said you needed 30 days for Orla. Now we said, okay, but 30 days for Orla isn't enough because you need the amount of time to take root plus the amount of time to count as a year. So now we actually have a way with Rabbi Meir which says 1 day is the amount of time to count as a year to work out. It's 30 days that it says you need it for Orla. It's the 30 days to take a root, right? Because that's what it also, so remember the Breita also said you need 30 days before Shemitah. That Breita that said 30 days was remember we started with the Breita that says if you planted 30 days before, then come Shemitah, within 30 days you have to uproot it, it doesn't count as a year. So that Breita is assuming that it needs 30 days to take root, because that's the amount of time that's relevant for Shemitah. 30 days before Shemitah, you have to uproot it. That's also why 30 days counts for Orla, because it really holds dafka like Rebbe Meir, that 1 day is enough. So you have the 30 days for taking root, plus 1 day, and therefore it took root, and you got your 1 day, and now you can already start the new year. Of course, the problem is 31. So the Gemara says like this, El Olam, where is it? Rebbe Meir. The whole reason the Breita there said 30 days before Rosh Hashanah for Shemitah and Orla is the 30 days to take root. But this is Rebbe Meir of the cows that says for Orla purposes, 1 day counts. So the Gemara says, Ihachi Lamed Aleph Ba, you should need 31. No, Kasavar, Yom Lamed Olo Kan Kan. Here's like Michael said, double duty, except not double duty the whole time, double duty the last day. Okay, so you basically went ahead and you planted this tree, right here on the last day of what comes before Elul? Av. Okay, you planted it on the last day of Av. So this is day 1, and then you get to the 29th of Elul, and that's day 30. So because day 30 began, it's because you entered into day 30. That's considered now it took root on day 30, not at the end of the day 30, but the middle of day 30. And then you have a few hours left, and that even partial day counts now as your 1 day, like the 1 day by the cow at the back end. So you have a partial day within this day 30. The first part of it ended taking root, and the second part it began, and that's your partial day, and then the year begins and you're in year 2. Okay? So that's how it solved it, but it actually points out that the Breita that says 30 days before Rosh Hashanah for Shemitah and for planting, it's switching itself. Until now it thought the 30 days was to mean you needed a month to count as the year. Now it's saying, no, the 30 days is you need 30 days to take root, and that's why it's relevant for Shemitah. Did it take root before Shemitah or during Shemitah? And therefore, by Orla, it's really just assuming you really just need just 1 day, and you can use the last day to do double duty. And that's why it works for Orla as well. But the 30 days is time it takes to take root. And really 1 day counts as a day. So the Gemara says as a whole year. So the Gemara says like this. Now Rabbi Yochanan said, they both interpreted the same verse. This idea whether you need 1 day to count as a year or a month to count as a year. Okay, now, whatever. I don't get what we're about to read, but let's go for it. On the 601st year, this is in the story of the Mabul, on the first month, and the first of the day, the Mabul sort of began to obey. What? No, this is when it ends, not when it begins, right? The Rosh Hashanah began in the second month. You have Shah Haaretz, right? Charva Hamayim Me'al, what is it?
Me'al Haaretz.
Charva Hamayim Me'al Haaretz, okay? So it began to dry up, fine. Okay, Rabbi Meir Savar, Mitakati Yom Echadu, it's just 1 day. It's first day, first month of the next year. It's 1 day, the Ayel B'Shana, V'Kakar Le'Shana. And it says it's the 601st year. So you see, Shema Mina, Yom Echad B'Shana, Chashiv Shana. 1 day in a year counts as a year. Like, I don't begin to understand this. It's the 601st year. If that 601 years have completed, it's the 601st year. It's the beginning of the 601st year. Yeah. But somehow he says, because it says, B'Achat Shana, like it counts like it's actually as if the whole year's already passed.
Well, it's the same as with the cows.
Right. If you say that you want the third year, not 3 years, right? Here, you by the cows, if you said you needed a third year, then fine, it's not a big chiddush. But the Gemara's framing is that if the idea is you need 3 years, and it's as if it's a full 3 years. But this is the 601st year. But somehow he's reading the verse as if it says after 601 years have already passed, not in the 601st year. Okay. Anyway. You see, 1 day is a year. The other one say back no. 601 years, and maybe in the word achat would be near shana kidakamrit. Then you'd be right. Then it's 1 day, and we're already calling it like it's 601 years have passed. Since it says achat before the shana, it's only 600 full years. My achat, and what's one? We began the next year. So again, I understand the response is saying it doesn't mean 601 years, it means 601st year. I don't exactly get why it matters where the word achat would have appeared. But the answer seems to be it means 601st year, not 601 years. Okay, Rabbi Eliezer says you need a month. My timer, what's his reasoning? That you need a full month into a year to count as a year. The verse says, because the same pasuk by Noach, it says on the first day in the first of the month. It's only 1 day into the month. And it already calls it a month. Again, same type of weird logic. Okay, it's the first month, but he's reading it not saying it's the first month. He's reading it as saying it's been already 1 month. It's already 1 month old the year, which is, not what the pasuk is saying. Anyway, it's only 1 day old, and it's already calling it 1 month old.
1 day into the month.
Into the month, and it's already calling it 1 month old. Okay, again, it's not calling it a month old. It's saying it's in the first month. But nevertheless, you see, 1 day counts as a whole month. Now, what does that tell you about a year? Well, you make a analogy. It's like, what do they call those on your SATs? A is to B, a C is to D. Analogy. See, I didn't even know that SAT word. But okay, but anyway, so if 1 day is to a year as X, 1 day is to a month as X is to a year. So what's the X? 1 day is to a month, as a month is to a year. So midiyom echad b'chodesh chashuv chodesh, la midiyom b'shana chashuvim shana. 30 days in a year counts as a year. Chodesh limnuyav, shana b'chashuv shana. Chodesh limnuyav, v'shana limnuyah. You do a month, you go by one of its units. A month is made up of days, so 1 unit counts as if it's the whole month already. And a year is made up of months. Now, why don't we do 29? I don't know, because 30 is, you always have, 30 is always a month, and therefore a month counts as a year.
Yeah, another question is, we don't say, I don't think we say a day is Me'ez La'ez, we say it's from morning till night.
Right.
So why we say a month is from Chodesh till the end of the month.
Yeah, it's true. Well, I guess because you're right. Because when we say Yom Echad b'chodesh chashuv chodesh, presumably it would be even if there was only 2 hours left of it. So why don't we say here, right? However much time is that what you're saying? How much time is left of the month?
No, I'm saying when you say Yom Echad b'chodesh chashuv chodesh, you mean Monday, not Monday 2 p.m. till Tuesday 2 p.m.
Oh no! Well, I'm not going to figure out what are the times we say Yom Echad b'chodesh chashuv chodesh other than this.
Day.
Well, right, the day. Meaning you don't say till Tuesday 3 p.m. You say till the end of the day.
30 days is not the same as a month.
Right? Because if you said a month, you would say right. You would need a full unit. Right? Yeah, it's true. It's
I don't make a bar mitzvah when someone's like 12. 12
Yeah.
years
Don't ask me what this means. All right, we're moving on. But the upshot is, for Shvius, the way the Gemara is concluding, Rashi reads it slightly differently, but I'm going to tell you Tosafos' way, which is easier. The issue is not Tosefet. Whatever your Tosefet is, doesn't matter. The idea that you would have to uproot it is if it took root on Shemitah. So the only question is, did you plant it with enough time so it took root before Shemitah, regardless of the Tosefet discussion? That's how Tosafos reads the conclusion. Tosefet is not the issue. By Orla, you first needed to take root. And that's a week. That's 2 weeks, 3 days, or a month. And then what you needed to do is you needed to actually, what do you call it? You need an amount of time that counts like it's been enough time, so that by what time it hits Rosh Hashanah, it's already considered it's been a year. And that could be a date between a day or a month. So after it's taken root, you need either a day or a month, so that by the time of Rosh Hashanah, now it already can be considered to enter into the second year. I should say that this idea of taking the 3 days or 2 weeks or a month to take root raises interesting questions in Hilchos Shabbos, because one of the malachas on Shabbos is like planting a seed or planting a tree or whatever. So the question is,
What have
you
you done?
plant it on Shabbos, but you haven't done anything until it takes root after. So the question is, what happens if after Shabbos is over, you go back and you pull the tree out of the ground? Have you been retroactively? Have you been machal Shabbos or not? So what?
Maybe planting has a different definition from malacha and for regular tree.
Right, it could be. So it could be that the malacha is defined as putting it in the scenario where things continue naturally. It will take root, even if in the end it doesn't take root, right? So what about, because the Gemara has a case about cooking, that the Gemara says that if you put something on the fire and you take it off before it cooks, you actually have not, retroactively, you have not violated Shabbos. Okay, so there by cooking, it actually does have to achieve the state of being cooked. But then the question becomes, well, but what if you put on the fire and you finish cooking after Shabbos, right? Do you violate then? Is it that still the act is the initial act on the condition that it complete? Anyway, so this idea of things that take time to complete become interesting in a Shabbos context, which is not ours, but the idea that you could not have, that the planting you did is not significant until 2 weeks or a month later, it can be very interesting, yes.
This discussion sounds like it's based on planting seeds in the ground, but nowadays we don't do that. We plant seedlings that have already...
Right, but it says notea. Notea is not a seed. It would be zoreya if it was a seed. Notea is you actually plant a shoot. And
So
marchiv and mavrich, it's not limited to that.
Okay.
So it says, coletes, coletes can mean like I said like strikes roots, but the word coleted is like absorbed, gets like...
okay, because a seedling already has a root.
Right, but this is talking about,
Okay.
this is talking about that.
Is it holding that the time it takes to take root before Shemitah is running concurrently with the days you need from going to the mundane to the holy?
So no, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying this is ignoring the Tosefet.
Oh.
There's a separate issue of Tosefet, which is not about planting things. Like I can't plow the land within the month before if the Tosefet is a month. And some things I can't even do from Pesach or from Shavuos before. So there's a period of Tosefet which is different. Obviously, Tosefos would apply here as well, but here for the halacha that would have to be uprooted is irrespective of the issue of Tosefos. The uprooting, the way Tosfos reads it, is only a function of whether it took root on Shemitah or not. Okay,
So would you need 60 days then?
well, you might need 60 days to allow you to do it, meaning there's one question about uprooting, and to allow you to do it, you might also have to be outside of the Tosefet period. So let's take the position that says 3 days. Are you allowed to plant it 4 days before Shemitah? Maybe the answer is no. Maybe you're right. Maybe because of Tosefet, you have to wait. You can only plant it a month before. But you went ahead and you violated Tosefet, and you planted it 4 days before. According to one opinion, you're still allowed to keep it. You don't have to uproot it because at least in the end of the day, it took root before Shemitah began. So that's exactly correct. Rashi reads that you need both, but Tosfos reads that they're independent. Okay? There's a Tosefos question, which is did you plant it where you were allowed to? And then there's the uprooting question, which is did it take root on Shemitah or before Shemitah? Yes.
Tacking on extra period from Rosh Hashanah to Bishvat for release and orless purposes.
Yes.
Does that hold? How early? When does that kick in? What if we planted in July? Way more than 30 days.
Yeah, you mean if you planted it way back here on like even before Tu B'Shvat or something like that,
Right.
would you have to? Could you here go by Rosh Hashanah? So there is some opinion out there that the only reason you have to do extra time here is because you sort of got off easy over here, but that's not generally the assumption. The general consensus is no matter how long it was before Rosh Hashanah, at the back end it's always going to go to Tu B'Shvat.
And the reason for that is
It's because then it's considered a tree and not a sapling. Okay, so let's just read a little bit more, finish the daf. Tanya, we talked in Brisa, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, B'Tishrei Nivra Olam. Okay, now that we're talking about the verses from Noach, and it says whether it was the first day of the first month, we want to figure out what month are we talking about. When did the world created, and therefore also the question about the early counting in the Torah. Before it says HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chadashim, before Nisan is established in the story of Mitzrayim as the first month, what was the initial counting in the Torah? And the only place we have dates in the Torah of the month of the year and the year is by the Noach story. So is that counting from Tishrei or is that counting from Nisan? We're going to be looking at those psukim a lot tomorrow. tomorrow, but we're going to start with these two statements. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, B'Tishrei Nivra Olam, the world was created in Tishrei. B'Tishrei Noldu Avot, the forefathers were born except for Yitzchak, as we'll see in Avram and Yaakov. B'Tishrei Mesu Avos, they died in Tishrei, an assumption that they died, they had lived out full years, so they died in the month that they were born in.
The day they were born, right?
Right. But Pesach, the one exception is of Yitzchak. But Pesach no like Yitzchak. Why is he an exception? Because of the next line. Rosh Hashanah nifkid asar Rachel v'Chana. When it says Vashem pakadet Sarah, right, or by Chana, right, there's a reason we read those on Rosh Hashanah. It's a day of remembrance. So Sarah was remembered, which means that she became pregnant. So if she became pregnant on Rosh Hashanah, then she gave birth on Pesach. Of course, that's a pretty short pregnancy. It's only 6 months. All right, so we'll see. But the idea that that Yitzchak was the one that was born on Pesach is a function of saying that Sarah, together with Rachel and Chana, were remembered on Rosh Hashanah, which means they became pregnant. Okay, Rosh Hashanah Yatza Yosef Mbeit Hasurim. He was remembered. Again, it's a day of remembrance. So Paro remembered him, and he was freed from jail. Rosh Hashanah Batla Avodah Me'avotenu B'Mitzrayim. They were freed from being enslaved in Egypt, meaning that imagines back even before the actual redemption and the Pesach events of Pesach. Paro already, the Egyptians had enough, and they sort of at least, remember before we had the whole idea of the slaves not being enslaved but not being freed from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. So we're seeing now a parallel of that idea in Mitzrayim. Maybe that's where it came from. One maybe informed the other. So that already stopped on Rosh Hashanah. But Nisan Nigalu, and in Nisan they were redeemed. But Tishrei Atidim Ligael, but the future redemption will be in Tishrei. So this position basically gives everything to Tishrei except the few things you have to give to Nisan. The only two things you have to give to Nisan are Yitzchak, because since Sarah was remembered in Tishrei, that forces Yitzchak to be in Nisan, and Pesach. But other than Yitzchak and Pesach, everything was Tishrei. Okay, that's one approach. That's
Rabbi Eliezer. Tishrei, why would we? I mean,
okay, because he obviously feels that. Now, why was Nisan given importance for the original Gula, not the other? We'll get to that, but at least understand conceptually, everything is Tishrei except the two things that had to be in Nisan.
I'm not holding on to why is this brought here because of Rabbi Eliezer?
No, because we were quoting the psukim of, some understand that the Gemara, it had the words in parentheses we skipped, and understand that this debate before about 30 days and 1 day and whatever somehow indicated whether you were reading the verses talking about Nisan or Tishrei. It's hard to see the link, so we took out those words. But the simple reason is because a lot of it is going to have to do with unpacking the psukim from Noach. So since we have been using those psukim from Noach of the 601st year, first day, first month, etc., we're going to go back to unpack those psukim to try to play out this debate in that context. So let's just read the two opinions. Rabbi Eliezer says everything was Tishrei except the two things that had to be Nisan. And Rabbi Yoshua Omer, he gives primacy to Nisan. B'Nisan nivra olam. B'Nisan noldu avot. They were remembered in Nisan. The world was created in Nisan. The forefathers were born in Nisan. B'Nisan mesu avos, they died in Nisan. But Pesach, no like Yitzchak, not only were they remembered, not only were Avram and Yaakov born in Nisan, even Yitzchak, he was born on Pesach. Now, because Yitzchak was born on Pesach, that leads to one thing had to be on Rosh Hashanah. For Rosh Hashanah, nifked asar Rachel v'Chana. Okay, so somehow because we agree that Yitzchak was born on Pesach, we're all going to agree that Sarah, Rivka, and Rachel and Chana happened on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, Yosef Beis Asurin. Yosef was taken out of the jail. Rosh Hashanah, Batla Avodah Me'avotenu B'Mitzrayim. They were freed from their slavery in Egypt, or whatever, they were stopped having to work. B'Nisan Nigalu, B'Nisan Atidim Ligael. So they were freed in Nisan, they will be redeemed in Nisan. So Rabbi Yoshua is the slightly more complicated one. The way to remember, at least primarily, the two things are Yosef Beit Asurin and Sarah, Rachel, and Chana, are all the idea of pakad. So the idea that like Rosh Hashanah is a time when Hashem remembers and Hashem pakad, right, that everybody agrees to. Okay, and therefore those two things he does agree to. Why also if the forefathers were freed, or stopped having to be enslaved, that's also not so clear. So the first one is easier to understand, that it's basically all about Tishrei. This obviously is fundamentally about Nisan, but there are certain things that he sort of concedes were on Tishrei, and we will play this all out tomorrow. All right.
That's your car.
I don't